Hi, I'm Chris Steele, and I want to take a minute to applaud you for taking a step towards increasing your financial education by joining us today. You know, over the years, people have come to love Robert Kiyosaki's candor in exposing the financial myths that many of the mainstream financial experts continue to talk about in magazines, talk shows, and news programs. To simply state the Rich Dad philosophy, it is that the foundation of your financial success is thinking differently. The traditional rules of money that most of us have been taught, go to school, get a job, work hard, they simply won't make you rich. The rich are raised knowing this truth. The poor are not. That's why we're excited to bring you this powerful online event. This event is designed to help you change the way you think about money and prepare you to take control of your financial future. So without any further delay, let's get started. Hello and welcome everybody to this Coaches Roundtable. I'm your host Chris Steele, and I am honored to have with me a few of Robert's personally trained coaches and success stories, Allison Timothy, Daniel Ray, and Ken Lawrence. I'm going to let you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves.
All right, my name is Allison, and I've been a coach with Rich Dad for about 17 years. I've invested in real estate for about 20, and I've had a lot of experience, different kinds of properties, different investments. I love coaching, though, because I love to take people through the different steps of real estate, just the different buying cycle, and really try to simplify it as best I can, yet still trying to give a lot of detail from my own experiences, things to do, maybe mistakes to avoid, and so that's one of the reasons that I love coaching, but I still love real estate because I get to do both.
Right.
Yeah.
How about you, Daniel?
I'm Daniel. I've been a coach for about 11 years now, and I've been doing real estate a lot longer than that. And one of the reasons why I enjoy coaching so much is because I get to help clients get started. And one of the big challenges that people have when they get started in real estate is they tend to make mistakes. And so what we as coaches can do, we can help speed up the process and cut down on the mistakes that they make.
Yeah, that's a great point. And last but not least, Mr. Lawrence?
Yeah, I'm Ken. I've been investing for a little over 20 years and coaching on and off for about a dozen.
And yeah, as you said, you've got a great deal of experience, and that brings me to my next question before we jump into our favorite subject, real estate. Let's talk a little about coaching. What is that like when you're coaching somebody, for the first time? They're buying their first property. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about your first property if you can remember back that far, Ken. But what's that like when you're coaching somebody?
For me, I think it's really exciting to be able to see somebody take those first steps. And it takes me back to my first property and some of the fears that I had, the challenges that I thought were going to stop me, and just be able to express to people, do you know what, there's a lot of different ways to be able to get to that final goal, being able to help them understand that there is more than one way to invest. Most people that jump into real estate say, well, I just want to buy the single family house, put a renter in there, and good is good. And so being able to coach someone and help them see other opportunities, help them understand building a strong foundation, it's really fun to see somebody build and grow from ground up.
Yeah. Well, Ken, really though, you've been doing this for 20 years. Do you remember the hesitancy, the fear of your first property when you're coaching somebody on their first property?
Yeah, I think anybody has a bit of fear when they do something for the first time, and I was no different. My first investment property was a little duplex, but I wondered about all the things that might go wrong, and there's a little bit of fear with the unknown in any time you do something.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, why do you think it's important for people to get some guidance when it comes to real estate investing?
Well, I think one of the most important reasons is if they do it on their own, they don't necessarily have that confidence, whereas as a coach, sometimes we can help them along, kind of point out things that are challenges that really aren't that much challenges. I've actually found that the biggest things that keep people from investing are these horror stories that they hear about,
right.
People getting into property. But the fact is, almost always the big mistakes that people make in real estate are from not knowing what they're doing. Yeah. And when my clients will bring to me concerns, well, what about this? What about that? And I point out the reason for the mistake and how to avoid it, 95% of these problems can be avoided. It's not that there's not risk in real estate, there is. But if you do it right, you can eliminate most of those problems, and those horror stories that you hear about just don't happen as much.
Right.
Yeah. No, I love the term calculated risk. I can remember our first property too, and it scared my wife and I to death, really, because we had never done it before. But I can remember the satisfaction of doing that first one and thinking, wait a second, I can do this again. And that's how it got started. But let's talk about it, because really we love real estate. We know that Robert loves real estate.
Right.
It is the only investment where you really can generate some serious cash flow, but equity at the same time, long-term retirement, serious wealth kind of thing. Right. Talk a little bit about that, Allison, in regards to 4 greenhouses, 1 hotel.
Yeah, I hear Robert talk about this quite often. He grew up playing Monopoly, which was probably the only financial literacy type game of the time. And so the premise behind Monopoly is you buy your 4 greenhouses and then you trade it in for a red hotel. The idea that Robert's talking about when he's referring to his 4 greenhouses red hotel is it's okay to start small. It's okay to start in your own backyard. You know, usually what he's referring to is let's start close to home. Let's start with an area that you know, maybe property that you're comfortable with. And something I tell my clients is, you know, hey, most of us have either tried to find our own property since we're coaching adults, usually. We've either had to try to find our own place to live. So you're used to asking those questions about how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, where is it located in the city, is it close to where I work, close to schools? And so that's kind of the idea when Robert's talking about his 4 greenhouses is start small, start close to home, do what you know, repeat it a few times, get to know the strategy, get to know your area, and then upgrade, you know, and then trade it into something else. And so that's something that as coaches I think we try to do with our clients is help them recognize that no, it may not be the property next door, but let's start with something you know, and let's start a little bit smaller, and then we can address some of those concerns or those challenges and say, hey, there's solutions to these, and let's just get through those first few, and then let's think bigger. We don't have to jump into that red hotel first. I suppose some do, but maybe in their mind that's small.
Right.
But for the majority of people that I coach, it's let's start with something a little smaller, something that feels a little more comfortable, that you can build your confidence, and then let's build it and grow it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, everybody starts out differently, but you don't have to start off with that hotel. You brought up a point, though, that I want to hit on. I'm going off script a little bit, sorry. But you guys have coached thousands of people in real estate investing. And I'm sure a lot of our viewers may think, well, my situation's unique. Right. You guys have handled thousands of customers, I should say, clients. Is there any question, I mean, are you pretty much hear the same situations over and over again with people? I mean, there really are no impossible situations that people are in. Am I right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we've worked with people who have been in just about every circumstance you can imagine, and there's always a way to succeed. There's always a way to get into real estate as long as the person is willing, in my opinion.
Yeah, sir.
We've probably seen it all.
They have to take that step. Ken, let's go back to your first property, that duplex. Sure. Yes. What was the situation? How did you get into it? Tell me about it.
I don't know. I had the notion kicking around in my head for even from a pretty young age that if I were to maybe buy a couple of rental properties, get them to at least pay for themselves, I'd probably be glad someday that I had them. And I was actually in college when I found my first property. Of all the properties that I had driven by with for sale signs, I don't know what made me stop and pay particular attention to this one duplex, but I did. I got a flyer from off the signpost and called the real estate agent and asked a few questions, and one thing led to another, and I ended up making this first purchase. And then it kind of grew quickly from there. Getting past that first deal, about every 3 or 4 months after that, I ended up buying another one. Yeah. And not only did I figure out that, I could get them to pay for themselves, but they started to generate a little bit of a cash flow on top of that. In fact, when I first started doing this, I really thought I would have some other career in whatever, and real estate would be something that I would do on the side. But after a few years, became apparent that this could be kind
right.
of the way I would make my living.
Yeah, yeah, and it was a duplex, great income property. Did you hold on to it?
I held on to it for about 4 years. When I bought it, I think I thought I'd keep it forever. Right. But my timing was a little bit lucky because property values in our area started to really climb in the next few years, and I ended up selling that one about 5 years later and took the money and bought a bigger one, kind of like Allison was talking about.
Yeah, but isn't it amazing that first property, the confidence you gain after doing that one? Yeah. And that's the part, it's just, people are going from the fear of the unknown, but once you get through that first one, it's amazing the confidence you gain and the potential you gain from that.
Right. Yeah.
It's and I asked about how long you kept it because, sometimes we talk about flipping. I know that's not part of Robert's, the reality is real estate is one of those things that buy and hold it's the best strategy. But people flip houses. We've done it. Of course, it's huge on TV. I mean, there's so many TV shows that talk about flipping properties. Talk about a little bit of that. Allison, you've done some of that, right?
I have.
I know Daniel has.
Daniel has. I think we all have, and I think most investors will run into property. In fact, I was working with a client today, and one of the things that she was mentioning is I went and drove by 10 properties, and the picture on the internet looks so different from the picture of the house that I'm driving by. And I'm like, well, of course, it was probably taken 3 years ago. So every house, every property we purchase needs something. Mm-hmm. And there's a line between, when does it become just something to fix up to rent out versus when does it become rehab. My first property that I jumped into, I was first summer out of college, so I was about 22. My brother called me at work. I was working for a mortgage company at the time. And he said, hey, I just found this house that's on the market. It's a really great price, but it needs tons of work. It's been a rental property for 11 years, and it looks like it. And so he said, I think we can go in. I think we can update the whole thing. He said, it's in a great neighborhood. Go drive by on your way home from work. And I drove by, and I said the same thing my client did. Holy cow. That thing needs so much work. I think just the bricks are the only part of the house that's probably worth saving. And so we went into this property with the intention of fixing it and then selling it. That took a little turn because we had fixed the property, and when the property was finished, at the time I was renting a house with a bunch of friends, and our rent just got raised. And one of my friends came to me and she said, hey, don't you own a house a few streets over? And I was like, yeah, but my intention is to sell it and flip it. And she said, well, what if me and this other friend that we lived with, why don't the three of us move in, we'll pay you rent, and we'll come up with a fair price. And I said, well, that seems fair. We need a place to live, and I don't want to pay someone I don't know rent when I have a house and a mortgage. So I paid my brother out, and my friends and I moved into this house. They paid half the mortgage, paid half the utilities, and that was my aha moment of, wait a minute, if I can collect rent from people I know, why shouldn't I collect people from rent I don't know?
Right.
And so we started doing it. Next house, though, was, again, intended to be a flip. The thing with a flip, though, is it's time intensive. And it was like another job. Even though I didn't have to use a ton of my own money, it did take some of my money, but even more importantly, it took a lot of my time. And so I think that's one of the things that Robert cautions about, is we don't want to look for another part-time job, especially another full-time job. And sometimes a flip can turn into that. Mm-hmm. And so we have to be careful of that when we jump into flips.
Yeah.
But there is a place for it in investing, I suppose, but it certainly is not my bread and butter. It's not something that I seek out regularly because I don't want another job. I want passive income.
Well, and right, exactly. And we talk an awful lot about passive income and the cash flow that can be generated from real estate. But I know, Daniel, you've done some flipping. I have as well. Where would you say, talk a little bit about the opportunity and the risk that's associated with it?
Yeah, not a problem. And I've got the same problem as Allison. I buy properties to flip and I end up keeping them as rentals.
I know, I just
That's a good problem to have.
Right?
Exactly, yeah, it's not bad. For those who don't know, flipping is where you buy a property, you do a lot of fix-up, and you intend to sell it for cash. And the benefit of that is if you need cash to spend, for your family, or if you need some cash to put in on another property as a down payment, that's a great way to do it. The challenge with flipping is the fact that it's more of a business as opposed to a real estate strategy. It is real estate, but it is a business because it does require you to get a lot of things right. You got to buy the right property at the right price, probably the right neighborhood. You got to make sure that your renovations are done, on budget and in time. And also you've got to make sure that the property sells and that the market doesn't turn and that it's all done in the proper time frame. So if you're up for that and you want to learn that, we've done it. It does work nicely if done well, but there's a lot of things that you need to juggle. But one problem that I find with flipping that almost always happens is when I meet somebody who's done a lot of flips, they almost always have quit at some point. They've stopped either because of the bad deal, they ran out of financing, or maybe they, maybe they just stopped for some reason. But they almost always regret one thing, and it's they regret not having bought rental. properties.
Yeah.
Almost every single time.
Well, and I think it is a balance, really, when it comes down to it. I see a tremendous opportunity with flipping, but there are some risks associated with it that are not there when you're talking about buying and holding. One, you have to be very much in tune with the market, much more so than when you're talking about buying and holding. Market fluctuations, if you're talking about relying on the ability to flip a property, you can get yourself in a bind. And that can cause somebody to stop real quick.
Absolutely.
One of the things I love about flipping is if you have your team in place, and we'll talk more about the team, and if you have them in place, you're just replicating, on each property. And I love I really get a tremendous amount of satisfaction out of providing the work for some of these guys, and to be able to come in, whether it's a plumber, electrician, to be able to give them ongoing work. But if you've got that team in place, I mean, man, it's awesome to be able to go and say, okay, go in, you know the deal, we're doing. I mean, it is a little bit about the TV, like the TV show. We're going to go with this floor, we're going to go with this countertop, that kind of thing. So it really is. I don't want to say it's easy, but you get a system in place, and if you're in tune with where the market is, there are opportunities there. But we don't want to get away from really. The real opportunity is in that buy and hold. That's where you're generating your cash flow and that long-term equity.
Exactly. My very first deal was actually a fix and flip. I had a friend of mine come to me because he was interested in real estate, and he saw that I'd been reading all these books and going to seminars and things. So he was going to buy a property, but he wanted a partner to help him, kind of coordinate this stuff. And he said, well, if I buy the property, will you come in as a partner and help me out? So he bought the property, paid for all the renovations, and we did a little bit of work in the property. We sold it. We ended up splitting the winnings 50-50. We made about $10,000 each. And in your early 20s, that's
a good
That's
paycheck,
great.
right?
Yeah. I love that you call it winnings too. That's good. Well, one of the things too that my wife loves, and I think, I don't know, it's maybe a personality thing, I get a kick out of it too, is that before and after. When you go in and we've taken, oh my gosh, we've taken properties that were so nasty. I mean, literally, we have pictures of just taking stuff to the dump. And then when we got finished, we had a great rental property that people loved living in because it was in a great location. So we enjoy that. We like taking the ones, my wife always says, that nobody else wants. Right. Because that's where the opportunity is, So, but let's get back to buy and hold and real estate in general. Ken, there's a myth out there that you got to have a bunch of money to get into the game. And of course, Robert says that's not the case. You don't have to have a lot of money to get into real estate. Why is that true?
Well, I said that I was in college when I bought my first property.
Yeah, where'd you get all your millions?
I didn't have a lot of money. Yeah, there are so many different ways to get started without a lot of cash. Creative financing strategies, finding sellers who just want out of a property and are willing to let it go. Sometimes just taking over their payments. I don't know how many of you have ever found someone who, for whatever reason, just wanted out, and would gladly walk away from their property if there was just no consequence, if they could just walk away and be done, or get a couple $1,000s and walk away. I purchased some properties that way. For a first-time home buyer, we talked about starting small. I think there's some merit to starting small, but I wouldn't want anybody to feel like they couldn't start with something a little larger. Right. And one of the things that I suggest to a lot of my students, especially if they're renting, is to maybe consider buying a small multifamily property, maybe a duplex or a fourplex where they can live in one unit, rent out the other 1, 2, or 3 units. Because first of all, there's some great easy financing programs if you're going to be an owner-occupant where you can buy it with 3 or 4%, sometimes even nothing down.
Especially as a first-time home buyer.
As a first-time home buyer, for sure. And so, there's a lot of different ways. We talk about a lot in coaching. I don't know how much detail we should go into just now, but there are any number of ways to buy property without having to have a lot of cash.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is just, to me, it gets to where it is kind of a game, where you're looking for those opportunities, because you do find buyers in all different types of situations, but it's about thinking creatively. When you mentioned the duplex in college, I thought, that's genius. That would be the way to go. I tell a lot of our friends, because the kids are getting ready to go to college, go see if you can't find a duplex. Right. Buy the thing, let them, collect rent on one side and their part's paid for. then they've got a property they can start with. It's looking for those opportunities, but the multifamily really is a good place to start. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I usually tell my clients that come back and they say, I just can't find cash flow with single-family house. No one can. You know, usually unless you are walking into a really good deal, you're not going to see huge cash flow from a single-family house, if any cash flow from single-family house. So as Ken mentioned, the 2 or 3 or 4 units, in most banking worlds, 4 units is the same to finance as 1. It's still considered residential. Once we jump 5 units, that's commercial. So different ball game, different team. We can do that. We can certainly help someone with that. But 1 to 4 units, it's the same loan. You know, and so as Ken said, buy 4 units, live in 1, rent out the other 3. You're likely to live there for free.
Right. That's just it.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity. And as coaches, we can help people brainstorm these ideas that perhaps they didn't even think about yet.
Yes.
Because we know there are a few tricks that still work when you're trying to speak to banks.
That is a great point, because a lot of times, you know, for a new buyer, a new investor, they're not going to think of those creative ways to finance or look for those. You know, go knock on doors, you know, see if somebody's interested in holding paper. A lot of times you'll find somebody that's had a property for years, they're willing to hold paper, and that allows you to get in there for nothing or next to nothing. Yeah. We've got, I can remember our first property, but fast forward 20 years, we actually bought a property in the last few years, and for us it was a big property. It was a couple $1 million property, but we had leased it ahead of time, and we had set the purchase price ahead of time. So by the time we bought the property, we had so much equity in it, we actually bought it with no money down. So it's one of those things that, you know, I learned along the way, but I think back to when I got started, and if I had the advantage of having a coach to be able to say, okay, hey, how do I get into this? How do I look for these opportunities? I would be light years ahead. And that's really, I think, it should be, I don't think that could be overstated. So Robert talks a lot about two main words when it comes to real estate: cash flow and leverage. And of course, good debt, you know, is a big part of that. How do those two play together, Ken?
Well, I mean, we buy for cash flow, obviously, but in my opinion, what matters more than just the absolute dollar amount that you're getting out of a property is really the relationship between what you had to invest to get that cash flow and what that cash flow is. Because I'm perfectly happy to buy a property with a very modest cash flow if I don't have to invest much to get into it.
Sure.
If I have to make a bigger investment, then I'm going to want to get a better cash flow, or I won't be so interested in it. But and this idea of leverage, taking the little bits of money that we're talking about that you can use to get into, you know, a property, a 3% down. If you buy a $100,000 property, you only have to put 3% down. Any cash flow you're making is based on not the $100,000 that the value of the property was, but just that small $3,000 investment that you made. And it's pretty common to get what we would call a cash-on-cash return in the 20, 30, 40% range and even higher using this idea of leverage.
Mm-hmm. And Daniel, when you talk about, Robert talks a lot about, you know, you make your money when you buy, not when you sell. What does he mean by that?
Well, I think what he's talking about is he's saying don't be a bad investor. Be a good investor. And what I mean by that is a bad investor buys a property that is not a great deal today, hoping that magically the deal will turn into a great deal, you know? And that's a lazy way to do it. Robert's saying be a good investor. In other words, buy a property that's a good deal today. It's a great price. It's a good undervalued property that's going to cash flow today. So I think that's what he's talking about, and I think we all understand that. I mean, if I was going to buy a dog for my kids, I wouldn't buy, you know, an angry, hard-to-control dog that bites people, and think that,
and
you know,
then just hope, right?
And then hope that this dog is going to
just
treat my kids right. And likewise, don't buy a bad deal hoping that it turns into a good deal. That's just foolish. And buy a good deal that you think is good and undervalued and cash flows today, as opposed to hoping someday it'll turn into that.
One thing I tell my clients is the day you buy it is the least amount of money. It's the worst it is ever going to look on your portfolio. Because over time, you're going to be able to raise your rents, you're going to be able to add value to that property, and so you are making money while you own it, while you are in the process. When you buy it, you are buying into cash flow, and we kind of joke, my husband and I joke, we just bought cash flow. We just bought ourselves a paycheck, because that's really what investing is. We shouldn't have to look out Well, in 10 years when I sell it, then I'm going to put that cash in my hands. But the day I buy it, especially if you buy a property with tenants inside, you start making money the day you close. That's when you're starting to make your money, not 10 years down the road when you sell.
Absolutely.
You make money then too.
Right.
But you start making money on day one.
Well, and again, getting back to the opportunity with real estate, no matter what your occupation is, whatever you're doing, this is something that you can be doing, and it's there. I don't, if you're bringing in cash flow from it, that's a bonus. But if you've got a property there that's paying for itself, that you've got long-term retirement that you can rely on, where else do you have that opportunity?
Right.
I don't know of any other investment.
No?
No.
You mentioned being in tune with your market. And when we were talking about flipping, we were kind of talking about doing remodels. Most of the properties that I've purchased over the years, I've purchased with the intention of holding them forever. But because I'm looking all the time and because I'm somewhat in tune with my market, occasionally I stumble across a bargain. And it might not even be something that needs a ton of work. I just know, because I look at properties every day, I know it's a good deal. It's worth more than what I can buy it for, and I might be able to buy it and resell it without doing much to it at all. But it has to do with being in tune with your market, like
Absolutely.
you said.
Yeah.
I actually bought a property just kind of like that. It was a few years ago. I was in the middle of buying one property, and then my realtor came to me and said, I've got this other property here that's a really great deal. You made an offer 6 months ago, which I'd forgotten because, made so many offers after that. And it was such a good deal, and the market had gone up after that. They said that this person's ready to sell it to you now. And I looked at it, and it was a really, really great deal. But I was already closing on this other property, and you can't go get a second bank loan when you're closing on one property. Otherwise, it causes problems. So I talked to a friend of mine and said, hey, would you lend me on this property? And he said, absolutely. And he wrote me a check, and then I ended up buying this property about 9 days later. It was a single-family home. I got a 9% interest rate on it, and it cash flowed about $150. Which goes to show that you can, in fact, buy single-family properties and cash flow.
Yeah, you got a great deal, but even at high interest rate.
Yeah, which I thought was hilarious because that's the highest interest rate I've ever paid on just about anything, And then I paid it off, and I still own it free and clear today, and it cash flows really nicely. But
Well, and for our viewers, I just want to say this is where you want to get to, where you're making offers that you forgot you made. You want to get to that point. But let's talk about that a little bit. How do you look at real estate now as compared to when you were starting out? Obviously, do you see more opportunities?
Always, always. I am constantly, as I drive, even driving here today, I'm constantly just scanning out the window looking for sale signs. I'm looking for something that looks a little dilapidated. I'm looking for, hey, that looks like 4 units, not a single family. I'm constantly looking for these things. I almost feel like I'm driving through the cash flow game, where there are opportunities everywhere to the point that you can't take them all, so you're kind of cherry picking, like this is a good one and this is a good one, and I always go home and I'm like, hey, we got to look at this thing, and I got to look up this property, and I'm texting my agent saying, hey, can you find me more information? I've got to go to a work meeting, but I've got to do this too, and I'm taking the kids here and there, but being able just to see it, it's like a game. Don't you guys feel like it's still kind of a game? In a good way that makes me real money, though.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a game.
Yeah. I think the way that I think you described it perfectly, it really does become, somewhat like a game, and that you really see opportunities wherever you look. And I think a lot of it is the fear that was there is no longer there. You've done it enough. Of course, you guys have done it more than most. And so to be able to translate that to somebody who's just starting out, I think is just huge. Again, I go back to that first property and just how scary it was. So I can definitely appreciate that. Thanks for taking part in today's live stream. We're interrupting the stream for just a minute to tell you about a special announcement. In honor of Robert's mission to elevate the financial well-being of humanity, we're offering everyone participating in today's event a free strategy session. Your free one-on-one confidential strategy session will give you a chance to talk to a member of the Rich Dad coaching team about your personal goals and how coaching can help guarantee your ultimate goal of getting out of the rat race. So use this time to take control of your financial future by clicking on one of the banners below for this exclusive offer. As you can imagine, Robert's personal coaching team can only accommodate a limited number of free one-on-one personal strategy sessions. So this offer is only available on a first-come, first-served basis. When we reach that limit, we'll be forced to pull down this exclusive offer. So click the banner right now to claim your free strategy session. Let's hear about the experience of a couple of rich dad success stories who took control of their financial future, and they've seen some amazing results.
Hello, my name is Catherine. I live in the Seattle area with my husband of 29 years and our son, our only child Connor, who will be 20 this summer. So recognizing that I lead a very busy life, I wear a lot of hats, I also run another business, I recognize the value of the Rich Dad Coaching Program. So I've been working with Nicole, who has been stellar. I knew I needed someone to keep me on track. She's not only kept me on track, she's kept me accountable, she's kept me focused, and she's also expanded on my vision of my business by helping to bring to light the fact that there needs to be systems, templates in place as well, to not just provide a house, but to also turn that house into a home for the family's son or daughter. I have my 5-year plan. My goal is within the next year to do 2 transactional deals to add to my credibility portfolio. And then I'm also in the process of completing my business and marketing plan. It's been an incredible journey. I know it will continue to be an even more amazing journey as I work on achieving my vision and my goal. I also want to thank Nicole for doing such an amazing job as my coach. It's the first coach I've ever hired, by the way. Money well spent. As well as thank you, Robert and Kim, for your organization and everyone that you've been able to benefit out there, myself included. Thanks again.
We were talking about leverage. Talk about a little about debt, because Robert, is a fan of good debt. Does it scare you at all, or is it really just part of doing business?
Well, I've got a thought on that. I really like debt more than the average person. I really do. I don't view it as risky anymore because I know what to do with it. But I think one of the huge advantages of real estate is when you combine appreciation and leverage together. If properties appreciate at 4%, that may not seem like a big deal, but when you add leverage to it, it makes it a lot more significant. And so if we were to look at an example of a property, maybe a $150,000 property, and you put maybe $30,000 down, well, on that property each year, on average, maybe you might make about $6,000 in appreciation. Not a whole lot, but nice, But if you consider the $6,000 that you made on the property and the $30,000 you put in to make it, 6,000 divided by 30,000, that's 20%. So we're not even talking about cash flow here. We're not even talking about the tenants paying down the mortgage. We're talking about this extra bonus appreciation. And sure, you can't take that money to the bank right away, but eventually when you sell the property or refinance it, you get the benefits from that. And that's why people get rich in real estate.
Absolutely.
Looking at more. Yeah. We had a house that we had as a rental property. And like we find another deal while we're kind of working on one, and you find the next opportunity. And we needed cash. And we had just put a bunch of cash into this first rental property, and we're getting it up and ready, and we've got tenants inside, and here's this other opportunity. And we thought, gosh, what are we going to do? Well, guess what? We leveraged the equity. We went to the bank and we said, hey, can you give us a second mortgage, pull our equity back out so we can buy this next property? And they said, yeah, we'll do you one better. We'll give you the equity from property 1. We will finance property 2, so you can just kind of slide it across the table. So we leveraged property 1 in order to buy property 2. No extra cash flow out of hand. And it was really, for those that have retirement accounts, you balance that retirement account, you move money from mutual fund to mutual fund 2, and you're comfortable with that. But then when we start talking of leveraging equity and moving it from property 1 to property 2, I hear some of my clients hesitate, like, that sounds scary. It's the same. Yeah. It is exactly the same, but being able to leverage equity in one property for the next, or cash flow, because when I go to a bank, they look at the cash flow that I make on these properties, and that helps us qualify for the next investment. So there's a lot of different ideas when we're talking about leverage. There's layers to leverage.
Well, and you hit on something too that I want to come back to in a minute, and that is the banking relationship. That's
right.
Part of your team, and that's part of your strategy going forward. Ken Robert talks about getting prepared before you invest in real estate. I mentioned having your team when you're talking about flipping properties. What does Robert mean when he says get prepared before you start investing in real estate?
I think it has to do, at least in part, with just making sure your own financial house is in order. I've coached a lot of people over the years, and there have been a few that I've coached that I've thought, as I worked with them and I see where they're at and I see what their financial habits are like, and I think to myself, I might be able to help this person buy some property, but I don't know if they're going to be able to keep it because they're such poor money managers. And so I think that's kind of where it starts.
Yeah, I think that, I can see that. How else would you say, because I look back and I think I wasn't prepared. Our first investment could have been a nightmare. It could have been our last investment. We were fortunate that we were able to come out of that and build on it. But one of the things I look back, if I'd had even a mentor or a coach, that would have prepared me immensely for going into what I was going into, because it was a great unknown. Definitely. What did you do to get prepared?
Oh gosh, my parents owned rental property when I was very young. And so from the time I was about, say, 15, I knew real estate is where I wanted to make money. I started taking drafting and architecture classes, interior design, fine arts. In college, I worked for a mortgage broker, started to learn a lot about how to finance properties. And then right after I finished college, when I was getting this first property, I got my real estate license, so I knew what mortgage brokers did. I knew what real estate agents did. Does everyone need to do that? No. I would only suggest that you get licensed or you work in a way like that if you really want to, because it's not necessary. It didn't make me necessarily a better investor, but I wanted that education. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to be an agent, but I needed to know what an agent knew.
Right.
And so those are some of the things that I did to prepare for that first property. Diving in, when my brother called and said, hey, we've got this opportunity, I go straight to spreadsheets and running numbers and figuring out, does this make sense? One of the things I had learned from being a mortgage broker is that if the property could not cash flow after the fix-up, it was not a good deal. So plan A was to fix it and sell it, but I always knew that we could rent it out and we would do just fine. So being able to look at a few different exit strategies with a property was a great way for me to prepare to take on a new investment, because I knew that there was always going to be a way that it was going to work. I knew that there was a way we were going to make money. Even if it wasn't plan A, still going to work.
Yeah, yeah. And, I mentioned earlier about having your team of contractors, whether you're flipping or not. I think to have a good electrician, a good plumber, a good team there, because regardless, if you go into a property, chances are you're going to have to do a little bit to it, no matter what your plan is for it. But also, you talked about the idea of getting licensed. To me, we've always been licensed because, let's face it, 3% off your purchase price, it helps. Every little bit helps. So that's one of those things that's easy to do, and I would recommend that as well, wouldn't you?
Just to get a license?
Just to have a license, to be able to, I felt like it gave us a little bit better understanding and appreciation of real estate in general.
I'll tell you what we did, because for whatever reason, it seems like some people just aren't comfortable dealing with real estate agents. There's a certain segment of the population
right.
that hate agents. I didn't really want to get my license because I didn't want to have to divulge that I was a licensed real estate agent, because I thought that would be a turnoff to some sellers. But as you said, I recognized that there was some advantage to having a license as I do these deals, because there's 3% commission on every deal you do. So one day I was talking to my wife and I said, honey, why don't you go get your license?
There you go.
So we can have the advantage of having her get her license, and I still don't have to have what I felt like was a bit of a burden of being an agent and having to tell people that I'm an agent. I just wanted to be a regular guy as I talk to sellers.
Did you ask her to change her name too?
He doesn't care what his wife, what they think of his wife.
What they think of his wife, but you wanted people to still like you. And so she was the heavy hand that was like, but I'm the agent.
Right.
But yeah, I think people can certainly be successful without having that license. And something I caution my clients about is, if you get your license and you have access to the whole of the MLS system, or whatever system people would have access to that has all the properties and all of the charts and graphs and stats, are you likely going to give yourself another full-time job? Are you the one who's going to be on the computer till midnight looking up all of this stuff? Or would it be better for you to look on a website, text your agent and say, you find the info.
Right. No,
and then
I get
you
that.
send it over. So I think you have to keep yourself in check. And people obviously know their personality and what they're likely going to spend their time doing.
Yeah.
And it is nice that my wife has her license, but I just want everybody to understand that we had done this for a lot of years
Right.
before she ever did that.
Right.
So it wasn't like we needed that, and I don't want people to feel like they have to
Right.
have their license. Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
nice.
No,
but,
it's a bonus. So I think it all goes back to having your team in place and being prepared. You mentioned being licensed. We're also licensed, my wife and I, and we're buying a property right now that's saving us an extra $15,000. So I think it's one of those things that you may want to consider. But let's talk about real estate in general. Why is real estate a good investment regardless of the economy?
That's a great question. And obviously, as Rich Dad coaches, we work with people internationally. A lot of different economies, the ups, the downs, markets, currency. I mean, there's so many different factors that we have to take into consideration. From my point of view, real estate works in every economy because people need food, clothing, and shelter no matter where they live in the world. And so this is something that I feel is a very safe investment. Now, there are economies. For instance, there are times when properties just don't cash flow. You know, even with the best advice, the best team, give it a bubble, give it inflation, give it whatever it is. And markets say, like Australia right now, it's really hard to get a cash flow. But I think something important for everyone to remember is that it's not about the single-family house or the apartment or the flat that's going to make them cash flow. Anything that is land, anything that is a building is real estate. And so I've got a client in Australia searching and searching for months trying to find cash flow in apartments, student housing, a lot of things like that. We just couldn't find it. Turned the table a little bit and said, hey, but what about parking structures? What about a parking bay? You know, and all of a sudden it was like the light clicked. He was like, I think there's still money there because jobs were going so well and people were, you know, thriving in the economy. It was just the real estate apartments didn't cash flow, but there's still so much to consider given any economy that we're likely still going to find something that will cash flow. We might just have to be a little bit thinking outside the box and get a little bit more
looking at
creative.
Different types of real estate. So Daniel, you even mentioned you bought real estate at a time when people were saying, don't touch real estate.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my best times to buy real estate was in 2011 and 2012. And for those who may not be in the U.S. or don't remember, real estate had a pretty big decline from 2011 to 2007 to about 2011 or 2012. And at that point, nearly everybody was saying, don't get into real estate, stay out. It's declined too much. But I viewed that as a buying opportunity, and so I bought several properties, and they've done fantastic. But the thing is, sometimes property markets, they go up, sometimes they're down. If they're down, be grateful, because it's a great buying opportunity. But if it goes up, just keep in mind that even though property prices may be a little bit expensive as compared to where they were at that point, if you get into real estate, you'll participate in those moves up. So yeah, it's not a good thing that you're not necessarily involved yet, but if you plan on being involved in real estate for decades, you're going to be part of those up moves in the future.
Absolutely. Allison, you mentioned a couple things. One about, a bubble and being, aware of that. I can remember back in 2005, we sold a few properties because what people were willing to pay for them, you couldn't cash flow them. So I have no idea what they're planning on doing with them. I know what ended up happening with them.
We know what happened, right?
But I mean, when they're willing to pay that kind of money for it, that's silly. But I think to your point about looking for different types of real estate, that really there's a huge opportunity. So Ken, a lot of people want to talk about, okay, the market, something's going to fall. I mean, the market's going to turn. You're a coach, but you're primarily an investor. What are you doing to prepare for the possibility of a correction?
I've been doing this long enough that I've seen, been through a couple of these cycles of booms and busts. And I always smile, when I hear naysayers. It doesn't matter what the economy looks like. It's never a good time to buy. When property values were high, they would say it's too high. And when property values went way down, they'd say, oh, the real estate's terrible. If I listened to, people around me, I would never buy anything.
Yeah.
But I think, and this is something that Robert emphasizes a lot, is that you buy for cash flow. As I look back, it would probably be fair to say that most of the money I've made over the years has been through appreciation. But if you buy only for appreciation, you can get in trouble, and that's what happened to people just before the market crashed. I had a lot of property when the market went down. It wasn't any fun watching to see, to see the values of my properties go down. But at the same time, it didn't really affect me much because my rents didn't change. People still needed a place to live, and the rents maybe went up a little bit, if anything, because people losing their homes still had to have a place to live. So as long as you have that staying power, as long as you've bought correctly, where you have a decent cash flow, the ups and downs in the values won't affect you that much.
Yeah, and to your point, people always have to have a place to live. So that's one of the things I love about real estate. But you mentioned, Daniel, that when you hear everybody talking about don't buy, you said it too, Ken, that that should cue something in your mind that says maybe there's an opportunity there if everybody's being told not to buy it. There should be some deals out there.
Absolutely. One of my favorite things, because I'm a contrarian, I use this principle in real estate and other things. And I've got 3 things that I look for in being a contrarian. Number 1 is a nice solid price decline. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen in real estate very often, which is why real estate's so great, but in other asset classes it does. And in 2011 that had happened. Number 2, I look for extreme pessimism. So if everybody hates an investment, there's a good probability maybe it's going to do well. And then the third thing I look for is an objective measure of value. And where I was buying in 2011 and 2012, I could find 20, 25% returns on investment on average properties on the MLS. So it really wasn't that tough. But one thing to keep in mind in this context of the discussion about kind of when is a good time to buy is you almost never hear somebody say, oh, gee, I regret buying 20 years ago. You never see that. It's if people could go back 10 years ago or 20 years ago and buy, they would, because the values of properties almost always increase. And when I hear people lament, I actually talked to a real estate agent a few years ago he was still a real estate agent. He had been in real estate since the 1970s, and he said he had bought 10 properties in the 1970s, and in a moment of madness, he called it, he sold them. And had he owned those today, he said he would have been completely rich. He would have been completely financially free. But he sold them. Right. And again, that regret from selling rental properties or not getting in early is usually the big regret I see people have.
Absolutely. And I think it's important for our viewers to understand, because there's no shortage of people out there that are going to say, oh, real estate, I'd stay away from it, something's going to happen, it's a bad deal. You are 3 of many examples of people that have been successful over years, fluctuations in the market. It goes back to, I don't know who said it or if it's scripture, I don't know, but a man with an experience is never at the mercy of a man with an argument. And it's the reality. You all have experienced it, you've been successful, you're living proof that regardless of what the market does, you can make money, and you can make crazy money in real estate. And I think that's important for viewers to know. Ken, I want to ask you, though, we were talking about being prepared and also the idea of risk in real estate. Why is it, Robert says that really there's not a lot of risk involved if you know what you're doing. Why is that?
Well, there are so many things that you can do as far as getting familiar with your market and learning how to make evaluations of the property and the cash flow. But when I hear the word risk, I think of so many of the clients that I've worked with at the beginning. They're afraid, like anybody would be, I guess, to starting something new. And a lot of what they see, what their fear comes from the money the debt that they'll have, as they get into property. My background was different from Allison's. Allison said that her parents had been investors before. My parents hadn't invested at all. My parents were both school teachers. And I can remember at a family gathering, I'd probably been investing for 4 or 5 years, about that. And I think I had maybe 8 or 10 properties, all small multifamily properties, all of them generating some positive cash flow. And I felt pretty good about what I had going on. I didn't feel wealthy by any means yet, but I could see that I had these properties that were paying for themselves and generating a little bit of money. Well, we were at a family gathering, and I happened to be talking to my dad. And my dad knew that I had been investing, but I guess he hadn't realized how many properties I'd accumulated over the last few years, because as we were talking and he was asking me, what I was doing and what I had, and I kind of told him. I felt a little proud of my accomplishments, and he started acting more and more annoyed, and I could tell he was getting a bit aggravated. And at some point in the conversation, he said, "Ken, I don't know what you're trying to accomplish by getting yourself into all this debt." And it occurred to me that he saw what I was doing in a completely different way than the way I saw it. All he saw was I had signed my name to mortgage obligations, and what I saw was I had debt, but other people were paying for it for me, and these properties were growing over time. Because I could be a bit of a smart aleck when I was a young kid, when my dad asked me what I was trying to accomplish by getting into all that debt, I said, "Well, you know, Dad, some people have a goal to be a millionaire by the time they're 30. And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, my goal is to owe $1 million by the time I'm 30. And of course, you know, he reacted like I thought he would, which is to shake his head and walk away. Right. But the reason, I mean, part of that was just to get a rise out of my dad, but part of it too was there was some truth to that, meaning that I knew if I owed $1 million, then I would have at least $1 million in real estate.
Sure.
And even though that wouldn't necessarily make me a millionaire, it would guarantee that someday I would be, because eventually that property would be paid for. It wouldn't be me that paid for it. It would be my tenants, and it would be worth a lot more down the road anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back to perspective. I mean, it's really, you were looking at it one way, your dad was looking at it totally different. And Daniel, for our viewers that maybe are just thinking about real estate, and maybe the risk is a little bit too overwhelming for them. Obviously, you have a different perspective. Yeah. What would you say to them?
Well, I think people need to understand there's a big difference between risk and being risky. You know, everything has risk. Every investment has risk, but you don't have to be risky. And one of my favorite discussion points by Robert Kiyosaki was when he would say that investing is like driving a car. You know, there's risk involved, but you know, if you follow the rules of the road, you take some lessons, you put on your seatbelt, there's less chance you're going to get into an accident, but there's still risk. And it's the same thing with investing. But I mentioned before that one of the things I've noticed is that people who get into trouble, into real estate, almost always make big mistakes that the pros, the people who really know what they're doing, don't get into. And one common mistake, or one common concern that people have is that, what if I buy this rental property and nobody rents it? You guys hear that all the time? Yeah. But the fact is, if you buy a good rental property, if you've got the right rent, you've got the right condition, and then you market it properly, unless you royally mess up on one of those three, somebody's going to rent it. It's just going to happen. So it's not a concern among professional investors at all, but it's a concern of people who don't own rental property generally. Another one is, what happens if I get a problem tenant? The tenant moves in, they do a bunch of damage and move out. And that happens in real estate. We've all heard it. But it doesn't happen a whole lot when you screen tenants regularly. You know, when you screen tenants, you do a credit check, you do a criminal and background check, you call previous landlords, you check their employment, you do debt-to-income ratio analysis. And what are the chances that a nightmare tenant is actually going to pass all of that? It's just not going to happen, you know? So you're going to see that beforehand. So if you do those screening of tenants, you're going to have good tenants go into your property, and it's very, very rare when you have those big challenges, you know? So my point is, if you know what you're doing and you put those proper things into place, the risks in real estate drop tremendously.
Right. And don't you hear often those horror stories are from people who have horrible tenants inside, and you say, well, but did you check their credit? It's like, well, no, I didn't have time to do that. You know, well, did you check to see if they could hold a job? Like, no, I just had to get someone in. I was so worried about having a vacancy, and so I just put someone in. I'm like, and how's that working out for you? You know, how's that not getting rent for 2 months, 3 months, and having to fight to get this person out that you probably shouldn't have put in the first place? But yeah, if you go through the correct steps, and that's something that we hear from clients is, you know, well, what if I'm not going to rent it? Well, then buy a property with tenants inside that have already been screened, that have months of credit history living in that apartment. You're going to lessen that risk significantly than if you just try to jump in the race car and head down the street without really gaining any knowledge or education or lessons. You know, start with something that has already proven itself, and then build from there.
Yeah, and here's the reality. This is what I'm hearing and what I've experienced. The risk in investing in real estate is going it alone, not having somebody in your corner that you can rely on for this information, because we all know people that have done that. You buy we all know people that have bought an investment property. They weren't prepared. They put a bad tenant in there. They didn't market it correctly, and it was a terrible experience. It was the last one they did. Right. That's the risk, going it alone. That's what people should not do. I want to ask you, though, actually to any of you, one of the things I love about real estate is that you can build incredible wealth like no other. You look at any of the wealthiest people, real estate is a huge part of their portfolio. Why is it with real estate that you can create that type of wealth? Ken, I'll go to you.
Yeah, I think the first time it really sank in with me how powerful real estate could be was probably 3 or 4, maybe 5 years into it. It was about the time when I was getting close to having enough passive income from my properties that I was able to quit my job. And keep in mind, I was working in a family business. I was making less than $40,000 a year. And one day, knowing that property values had been rising, I already admitted that I bought at a bit of a lucky time because it was just before our market had one of those, upswings. And I was aware that property values were going up, and I sat down and I just made a little list of every property I owned, 8 or 9 of them, and I wrote down what I knew that I still owed on each of those properties and what they were now worth. And when I got to the bottom and compared the two, I had nearly $400,000 in equity in these, 8 or 9, maybe 10 properties. And it was startling to me to think that just by buying these properties and sitting on them, that I could have accumulated that kind of wealth. There's no way I could have ever saved that kind of money from the income from my job. Sure. I hadn't even made that much over those years. Yeah. But it was almost effortless, to just, I'm not that clever, and I'm not that creative. I don't know what else I might have done in life to, earn a good living, but I can buy some property and sit on it while my tenants make the payments.
Exactly. Right? Yeah.
And so, that was the first time I really realized what this was going to do for me.
It's amazing, and I want to build on that too. But we were talking a little bit about politics, and regardless of where you stand in political party affiliation, but we hear Social Security there's a good chance we may not be able to rely on it. And so retirement is something that everybody should be thinking about. Why is real estate such a good investment when it comes to retirement?
Well, let me give you an example. A few weeks ago, I started putting together, for some of my clients, an analysis of what it would look like if we put a number beside each of real estate's advantages. Because we know cash flow, and we know appreciation, tax reductions, tenant paying down mortgage leverage and stuff. But I actually took an example of a single-family property and put numbers beside it. Maybe $200 cash flow, for cash flow. Appreciation, maybe on average, maybe $500 a month on this one property. Tenant paying down mortgage, maybe $150. Tax advantages, and I was so embarrassed by what I saw. Can I show this to my clients? Because it's so high. I didn't know if I could do it. It was something like $900 in cumulative benefits. So yeah, you can only take the cash flow to the bank, but the other stuff over time really builds. And after a few years, you look at your net worth and you say, holy cow, what happened? How did I do that? But if real estate can also be a fairly simple retirement or way to retire. And if you think about it, your tenants are paying off your property. That's one of the biggest benefits of real estate. And so imagine if you're 25 years old and you set a goal to buy one property a year until you're 35. So you're 35, you have 10 properties. Well, 35 to age 65, which is when most people retire, you'd pay off all those properties. You'd pay off all those mortgages, and you'd have, $6,000, $7,000 in today's value to cover your retirement. You wouldn't be rich. I'd say buy more properties than that, but you could do that. Sure. Or if you're 40 years old and you want to buy 10 properties a year for the next few years, and then maybe double up your payments, take your cash flow, put it into those mortgages. By the time you're 65, you're the same. So again, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. But even buying a property every once in a while, even simply not selling the home that you just moved out of and keeping it. The average person probably owns about 4 or 5 or 6 homes during their whole career.
Sure.
So you just hold on to those. It won't necessarily help you or guarantee retirement, but might give you $3,000 or $4,000 passive by the time you retire.
Absolutely. Well, here's what I love about it when you talk about retirement, and I think you guys would probably all say the same thing. we have this thing in our mind, we retire at 65. As far as I'm concerned, I don't want to be any more retired than I am right now. This is something that you can do until you leave this earth. You know, it really is something that it doesn't matter how old you are. You can continue to own property and collect a check. I mean, it really is. It's not like you're looking at, you know, at a certain age to say, I'm going to stop investing in property. Listen, I know you guys, you'll be investing until you can't, until you're not upright anymore. It's fun. It's what you enjoy doing, right?
Yeah, and I have a story right along those lines. We bought a fourplex from a gentleman, and it caught my eye, caught my agent's eye on the MLS, because in the section where it mentions, you know, basically how do you want to get paid as the seller, most people will put cash, conventional loan. This seller had listed cash, conventional loan, trade, seller finance. I mean, it was like they just checked every box, like anything is possible. So we're like, well, we should probably go see this thing. So we see this fourplex, and it's beautiful, and it is immaculate and so well kept. Well, come to find out, the owner was an 85-year-old gentleman, and he would just kind of tool around the property, fix things up, make the gardens look nice. I mean, it was just, he did a great job. And so we started talking about, you know, well, tell me about this seller financing. What do you want? What do you need? And he said, listen, I'm 85 years old. He said, I don't need to be walking around this property anymore, but I just want the money. He's like, so if you can just give me money every month, he's like, that works out pretty well for me. And I was like,
that works out well for us, too.
You know what? I think we might have a deal. Right. So we were able to buy this property from this 85-year-old gentleman who didn't want to retire from investing. He wanted the cash flow. He just didn't want to have to worry about the property anymore. And I was like, hey, I think we can make this work.
Absolutely.
So we continued. We set up payments, frankly speaking, probably longer than he was going to be around. And he said, you know, if I pass away, my kids get this money. And I was like, and there you go. And that's why we do it.
Yeah.
And it didn't take any more time or effort or anything out of his day, but it took care of him for perhaps the rest of his life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what happened to him. All I know is we just kept sending the money.
Sending the checks.
They kept taking the money, and we got ourselves a really nice fourplex.
That's awesome. What a great story. And I don't know, again, any other form of investing where you find those type of opportunities. Thanks for taking part in today's live stream. We're interrupting the stream for just a minute to tell you about a special announcement. In honor of Robert's mission to elevate the financial well-being of humanity, we're offering everyone participating in today's event a free strategy session. Your free one-on-one confidential strategy session will give you a chance to talk to a member of the Rich Dad coaching team about your personal goals and how coaching can help guarantee your ultimate goal of getting out of the rat race. So use this time to take control of your financial future by clicking on one of the banners below for this exclusive offer. As you can imagine, Robert's personal coaching team can only accommodate a limited number of free one-on-one personal strategy sessions. So this offer is only available on a first-come, first-served basis. When we reach that limit, we'll be forced to pull down this exclusive offer. So click the banner right now to claim your free strategy session. Let's hear about the experience of a couple of rich dad success stories who took control of their financial future, and they've seen some amazing results.
Hi, my name is Mike Johnson. I've been in the Rich Dad coaching program for the last year now. I'd like to share my story today with you just to give you an idea of what can happen over the course of a year in the Rich Dad coaching program and how it's affected my life. I just finished the phase 1 modules and I'm going into phase 2 now. Basically, this program has turned the way I think about money completely around. My son put it very succinctly the other day. He said, Dad, you're going through a personal financial revolution. And he's absolutely correct. Now, to begin with, we started with the real estate module in the coaching program. And I have to be honest, I really wasn't interested in real estate before I took this course, but Mr. Kiyosaki's program has turned my thinking completely upside down. And I'm still working on my first real estate deal right now, but the way it's set up, it's going to be a really neat business, and we're definitely going to have some really good positive cash flow coming out of this piece of property. And I just finished my last module, the paper assets module, and that one has opened up my world to, or opened me up to a world that I've never really experienced before, and it showed me the incredible leverage that's available with trading options. And it's an amazing thing. As an engineer, I'm always interested in leverage and from the physical perspective, but this is leverage from a financial perspective. And it's really amazing what you can do and do quickly with the paper assets work in the coaching program. So if you're thinking about taking this coaching program, I would definitely encourage it. I wouldn't have traded it for the world. It's been able to help me personally, help my family, help my friends, and Mr. Kiyosaki and Kim and the whole Bridgeside coaching program and team have been a real blessing in my life, and I'd just like to thank you for it.
But Ken, you mentioned something that I think I'd like to go back to. You started investing when you were still working in a family business. Mm-hmm. How long did you do that? Because a lot of times people think, well, I'm going to become a real estate investor. That means I got to leave whatever I'm doing. I think it's really important for people to understand this is something you can start small, at one house, at one duplex, whatever it is, and continue doing what you're doing.
Right. Yeah, I think, I was working in a family business. I was actually driving a truck. My uncle had a trucking business, and I was just taking every little bit of money that I could save from doing that, and I put a little bit of money down on a small multifamily property. I had a client actually ask me the other day, how long from the time you bought your first property until you had enough income that you could quit your job? And I think I figured out it was about 4.5 years. And but yeah, there was nothing about real estate investing that would require me to just do that full time. I tended to spend a lot of time looking at properties because, like we said, it gets to be fun. It feels like
Sure.
a bit of a treasure hunt. And so I would spend whatever spare time looking for bargains, looking for a good deal. But didn't keep me from, having a job and supporting my family while I was doing it.
We would do it. We would drive around. I can remember when the kids were in car seats. We'd go drive through neighborhoods, and then, in the evening, we'd be looking up properties, on MLS, or tax records, whatever. You can definitely do it in your spare time, regardless of what you're doing. One of the things I love about Robert and his mindset, and one of the things I picked up from Rich Dad Poor Dad was the multiple streams of income. And I think that's so important for people to understand. But why is it that real estate investing is Robert's favorite?
Ooh, there are a lot of reasons. In talking to Robert and Kim, which in fact I think real estate investing is probably Kim's favorite, Robert's wife. He likes it, but it's her favorite. And she was the one that started picking up property after property when they first got married, and he was like, what are you doing? And then he kind of got on board. One of the main reasons Robert loves real estate is taxes. For a lot of us, or maybe those out in the world, you dread tax season. For us here, I love tax season. It's bonus money. This is where I start to really put together all of those numbers. As Daniel said, putting together the list and seeing what does this all look like, and where did we make money, and where did we have that appreciation. But one of the real reasons I hear Robert come back over and over and over to real estate is so many tax benefits. In so many countries, there are tax benefits to owning property, to giving shelter, to providing jobs, as you had mentioned, being able to provide a job to someone. And so there's a lot of tax benefits, steady wealth. We can set up a lot of fixed rate loans. We can set up a tenant on a 12-month contract to pay the same amount of rent. There's a lot of predictability that goes with that as well. And for Robert, that's just more cash flow. It's passive income. It can be easily delegated to many other parties, yet we still get tax benefits. We still appreciate, the properties still appreciate. We still get cash flow from those properties as well. So there's a lot of different ways to build wealth and completely be hands-off.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And Daniel, we were talking before. I mean, you've done other things besides real estate investing. Why do you go back to real estate?
Well, I like trading the stock market. I invest in precious metals and commodities, and I do real estate. And one example that I might share that just kind of explains why I end up going back to real estate. Many years ago, there was an investment that I was involved in. It was a paper asset investment. And I bought it, and I thought it was going to do really well. And then I saw some real estate that I wanted, and I got out of that investment and bought the real estate. And the investment that I was in before I got into the real estate tripled in value. And I'm thinking, oh, had I only held, for the next couple of years, I would have done so well in that. because it did exactly what I thought it was going to do, but I wasn't in it. But turns out I did better in real estate than had I watched that investment triple, because of the leverage and the appreciation and things. So when done right, real estate can have so many huge benefits that it's better than most things. So as much as I love the stock market, I think real estate is probably the better investment.
Well, I think you have a lot more control over a real estate investment. If I want to add value to my real estate property, I can finish a bathroom. I can add a bedroom. I can put on a new roof. I've got a huge amount of control over my return and how I build the value of that. Whereas on a stock or being involved with paper assets in some way, you kind of let go of some of that control over what that company may choose to do or whether or not they may choose to do those improvements. And so that's what I like about real estate is, it's going to have this infinite return as long as I still maintain that property. Yeah. And I've got a huge amount of control over whether I do or whether I don't.
Yeah. Ken, do you know any other form of investing that you prefer over real estate?
No, like Daniel, I've invested in the stock market, and there are some things that are fun about doing that as well. And I've heard people say, well, the stock market goes up on the average by around 10% a year, and real estate only goes up by 4% a year, and so they say, well, then the stock market is better. But they ignore some of those things we've been talking about, like the leverage. If I want to buy $100,000 worth of stock, for the most part, I need to have $100,000. But I could buy a $100,000 home with maybe only $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 down. So if it goes up by just 4%, and I only put $3,000 or $4,000 down, I doubled my money.
Every year.
Every year.
Every year.
For as long as I hold that property.
Right.
That's exactly right. And maybe one other point, too. I think the last time I looked, IBM stock was trading at around $180 a share. What are the chances that you could find somebody that would sell you a share of IBM stock for $150?
You can't negotiate, right?
It wouldn't happen, would it?
Right.
Because they can sell it for $180 by clicking a button on their computer. But how often have you found properties that might be $180,000 or worth $180,000 that for whatever reason you could buy for $150 or maybe even a little less?
Yeah.
Much more likely to happen. So, yeah, I prefer real estate.
Yeah, and it's fun. Again, I've done very little in the stock market, and I just know that I feel so much less control than I do in the real estate market. It's been much more beneficial for us. Let's talk a little bit about the benefits. Let's talk about the passive income. Tell me just any of the fun things you've been able to do with that passive income over the years since you've started investing in real estate.
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing I love about passive income is it's passive. I know that's kind of obvious, but I want to take a minute and talk a little bit about it.
It's one of those things that until I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, it's a mindset, and when you start playing cash flow and you start getting this idea of what really passive income is, it's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's addicting too.
Yeah.
So typically with my rental properties, the rent comes in between the first and the 5th of the month, usually the 5th. And, and then my management companies, write up a statement, they email it to me, and then usually the 11th or the 12th of the month, the money just shows up magically into my account. Yeah. And sometimes I'm not even expecting it because I lost track of time. And I look and say, oh, there's a whole bunch of money in my account, And that's what happens. And so I like that. But another thing I like about it is it frees up my time that I can be doing other things. And a good example of that is time with my family and time with my kids. So the other day I was able to be with my family when my kid was opening presents. And many, many years ago, I'd have to be doing something else. But here it was in the middle of the day, and I was able to see him open presents and eat cake in the middle of the day. And then I was able to sit down with him and put together this new science kit that I got and kind of explain science. And at a time when most working parents would be at work, And so it's given me the opportunity to experience my kids' childhoods and be there with them as opposed to be doing, going off somewhere else and just seeing pictures and hearing stories.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things that sometimes we can take for granted. You forget you're home in the middle of the day. They come from school, you're there already, waiting for them, whatever. I mean, that really is a huge, benefit. What else? What are some of the other things? Let's talk about some of the fun stuff, trips or whatever, things that you've done.
Everybody,
before, right?
Everybody has their thing that they spend money on, and in my family, it's vacations.
Yeah,
we just like to travel. So.
Yeah.
And that gives you the time, and it gives you the resources to do it. By investing in real estate. I mentioned before, I've told you guys, we did something that we had dreamt of doing. We sold our home, we bought an RV, and we traveled for a year. The boys were homeschooled, and I look back on it now. It didn't seem like such a major thing then, but I look back on it now and I think, wow, what an incredible blessing that we were able to do that. And if it weren't for real estate, we never would have had that opportunity. So flexibility, I think because of our mindset, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not out buying extravagant car. You could spend money on that if you wanted to, but to me, the flexibility, the ability to take off, take a trip, spend time with your family, that's really, you can't put a price on that.
No, you can't. The one thing that I always just, it's like the jewel of why I invest and why I continue to invest. I had twins. My first kids were twins. And here in U.S., you get a couple weeks off of work and they pay you and that's all well and good. Because of my properties, because of that passive income, I took a year off of work. And in fact, I've never gone back full-time to work. I stayed home with those babies. It was hard work. You know, I just didn't get paid for that work. But I didn't worry about a paycheck. I didn't worry about mortgage. I didn't worry about how am I going to put food on the table for these two brand new babies. I just took care of babies. I just got to spend a year bonding with my kids, getting to know them, getting to know this whole new world of parenting. And as you mentioned, this is something you can do in your spare time. I didn't have a ton of spare time. I still don't because I still have twins.
Right.
And I've added 2 more kids. So I'm a mom of 4. And they're young. My twins are now 9, almost 10. And as you mentioned, you put the kids in the car seats in the back seat and you take them. And you go, and that money still comes in, and the investment still happens. And now I sit with my 9.5-year-old son, and we analyze RV parks. And we look through the numbers, and he loves it. And it's just so much fun to be able to still invest. But that was just the crowning jewel of all of my investments, and that passive income is without any pressure, without any stress. Took a year off of work, and I was just a mom.
Yeah. I mean, you took a year off and decided not to go back.
Right.
I don't know many companies you could be working for and get that type of leave.
I know, exactly. You can't. That's the thing. In the U.S., you don't get to take a year off. I know some other countries, they do that. Here you don't. So that had to be self-sponsored. It had to be my passive income. And because of those investments that I had set up in the right way with cash flow, we did it.
Yeah. How about just the opportunity to do this with your kids and have them pick up and learn some of this stuff? I mean, most people, they're off to a job, you know, Johnny doesn't know what Daddy does, you know, really, Dad's at the office.
Right.
They're watching us do what we do, learning. We know that they're like sponges. So they're learning this, they can do that in their future, right?
Right. Well, in fact, my last closing, I took my 9-year-old son. And I mean, how many times can you take your kid to work? You know, and here I am, we're hauling him in, my husband and I, the 9-year-old, and the ladies at the title company where we closed, they were so nice, and they just kept giving him stuff. They kept giving him treats and drinks and this and that, and I was like, well, he's sold. Like,
right.
He is in this business for the long haul, but he just sat there wide-eyed looking at these numbers, and we're just going through and we're signing, and we walked out, and he said, how much money did you just make? And I was like, oh, don't worry, we're going to be okay. You know, and it was so fun to be able to take him and just see that light kind of just like click on, and it was he's sold, and it's fun.
It's fun. It really is fun. But you know, there is some uncertainty for this next generation. You know, we talk about kids getting out of college, having so much debt. We are preparing them really for their future, regardless of what they decide to do. They already have an education in real estate investing that they can rely on. That, again, I go back to, I really think that's priceless. How much has that played into raising your kids, Ken?
Well, my kids are a little older. My oldest daughter is the only one that's married just yet. Her and her husband bought their first home about 4 years ago. They are expecting their first and decided that they needed a bigger house. And so they just barely made an offer and had it accepted on a larger home. But they're going to keep their first house as an investment because they've watched. Right? That's my oldest. My youngest, I just flew. I have some property in another state. I just went to visit that property just 2 weeks ago. I took my youngest son with me on the plane, and we went out and he watched me. I've got a mobile home park and a couple of other properties out there, and he watched as we drove around and looked at what I had and looked at a couple others that I was considering buying. And so I think they're learning.
They do. Yeah, we have a phrase at our house. It's like, and someday you can move out, because they understand that there's opportunity, and they don't need a ton of experience. They just need the education to be able to see those opportunities.
Yeah. And I think it's important that they know they're not being charged for that yet, but I think by the time they're 18, you guys need to start charging them for what they're learning from you.
Agreed.
So, Allison, talk a little bit about the concept of infinite return. We hear about that. Robert talks about it. Explain that.
Well, you break out those words. Infinite meaning forever and ever. Return meaning it's going to continue to make money. With real estate, as long as my name is attached to that title, it will continue to bring in a return. And so that's what we're referring to when we're talking about this infinite return and the power of this infinite return. I really don't have to do anything other than sign my name, put it on title, and I continue to get this return until I sell and say stop. As long as I am in that game, as long as I am on that title, that return will still carry on.
On that same subject, I was just thinking, when I think of infinite, I think of infinitely high. And a little while ago, we were talking about how my biggest concern when I'm evaluating a potential deal is how much am I investing for the return that I'm getting back? And we've all had experiences occasionally when, for whatever reason, we've been able to buy a property with little or nothing out of pocket. Well, if you think about it, any return I get on nothing invested is infinitely high, right?
Right.
And so when we talk about infinite returns, that's the first thing that pops into my head.
You know, one thing that comes to mind is when I really think back to my early days, I didn't have any money to invest. You know, I had other things to take care of, so I borrowed it. And then I invested, and I borrowed more, and I invested it. And I took the money that I borrowed and made money and put it somewhere else. And then I took the money I had borrowed and made more money on and moved it somewhere else. The wealth I have, I never at any point really put much of it, of my own earnings, into real estate or the stock market. It's the same money going around. So essentially it's infinite wealth because I invested borrowed money from the beginning.
Yeah, and that goes back to the whole concept of other people's money that Robert's a big fan of, and building on that, and you can see where the infinite return would come from. Let's talk about your looking back. Again, you guys you've bought properties, you've sold properties, you've got all different types of real estate. Is there one that stands out to you that you would say, yeah, this is the one I'm most proud of, most successful investment that you made?
Well, one thing that stands out for me, maybe touching on a few things that we talked about before, including our family and also, buying at a good time. One property I bought a few years ago was, if I remember right, I think it was Halloween Day 2012. And the reason I remember the exact date is because
if I remember correctly, it was Halloween 2012 at 2 o'clock. I was right.
It was about 1 o'clock, actually. And the reason I know this is because I brought my whole family. And we had 3 kids at the time, and we had a newborn baby, and we were trying to feed the baby at the same time as signing documents. It wasn't a great idea, and the kids were actually really excited about going and trick-or-treating and stuff. So, we just wanted to take them to a closing and see how that happened. So it was kind of fun. But that deal was a property that I bought in 2012, and it was it was a single-family property, yet another one. But it was a big one. It had been built in about 2005, so it was relatively new. It's about 3,700 square feet, which is big for a home. 5 bedrooms, 3.5 bathrooms, and at the time it was renting for about $1,500. And I got this one as a short sale, which is kind of just a kind of foreclosure, without getting into that detail, for about $87,000. And it cash flowed really well, and cash flows very, very well to this day. And I like it because I brought my family to that closing and have busy but nonetheless good memories about it. And the fact that was one of the properties that I had acquired in 2012 in that area, and that property has more than doubled. It's worth more than $200,000 at this point.
Nice. That's great. Ken, how about you? You mentioned mobile home park. I don't own any, but I would love to. Which I'll be cornering you when we're finished here to ask you some questions about that. I want to glean some information. But do you have a favorite?
I don't know. Some of them were properties that I bought at a great price and knew I'd made a lot of money the day I bought it. Some of them had great cash flows. Maybe one I might mention, there was a property, I'd actually purchased a mobile home park. I found it on vacation, actually. And
you never quit working.
And anyway, the agent, it was about 3 hours from where I live. The agent who had helped me buy that mobile home park called me a few months later and said, hey, I just wanted to let you know, I don't know if you're still looking for other investments, but my CPA, her own accountant, I just found out wants to sell his 20-unit apartment building. And I said, oh. And she said, and he'd be willing to finance it as well. And I said, okay, well, tell me a little bit about it. And she said, well, he wants $450,000 for it. And when I heard $450,000,
20 units.
That's really cheap for 20. That's, $22,000 per unit. And I thought, okay, this building's probably some old, terrible place, And I said, well, tell me, how old is it? And she said, well, it was built, it's actually 5 fourplexes that were all together. They were built in the 80s. And I thought, well, that doesn't sound so bad. But it was in another city, again, about 3 hours away, and I didn't know the market that well there. And she told me enough about it that it piqued my interest. So I said, well, why don't we do this? How about if I drive up, we can spend a day, we can look at everything in the area so I can get a feel for the market, and then maybe we'll make an offer. So I went up there, I met with her, she showed me everything else that was for sale and some of the things that had sold recently in larger or medium-sized multifamily properties. And there was nothing that had sold for less than $30,000 a unit, anywhere that I could see. And I kept thinking, she's a real estate agent, I kept thinking, why is she telling me about that? Why isn't she buying this property? Is there something I'm not understanding? Because it looks like this should be worth $650,000 or $700,000. And but I couldn't see any reason not to, and so we wrote up an offer, and I bought it.
And they held the paper.
And they held the paper. That's right. And I still to this day wonder, why would she not have purchased this property? It was undervalued by at least $150,000. And we talked earlier about, do you need a real estate license? Well, sometimes having a real estate license doesn't necessarily make you a great investor either, because if I had been in her shoes, I'd have never passed that deal along to somebody else. But all she could see was, I'm going to get a commission.
But again, that goes back to that perspective. Some people are meant to be investors. Some people are meant to, to have a job. And you talk about a diamond sitting there, right? That fortunately you grab. So that's great. Allison, what about you?
Oh, there's always stories with properties, but no, there is one that I think of often when somebody's like, hey, should I get into it? And I'm like, well, there's this one deal. So there's a property. It was my second one that I bought. So after I'd moved my friends into this house we rehabbed, then I was like, okay, I'm going to go buy more. So I bought another house. It was built in 1907, 1911. It was old. And it looked old, and I love old houses. I love the character of old houses. I love their old hardwood floors. I love everything about them. So I was like, I want this house. Bought the house from this woman for just over $100,000. It needed some work. She'd started to do some renovations, but in my opinion, kind of cut things short. So went in, we put on a new coat of paint, put new kitchen cabinets, kind of fixed up this house, put tenants inside, rented it out. A few years down the road, we decided, okay, well, let's turn this house into it had 2 bedrooms. We thought, let's do a third. It had this garage kind of space that was really unusable space because the house was so old, a modern car doesn't fit in it. So we thought, well, let's just turn that into a bedroom. Well, it was so old that we had to go to the city, get our permits, and they said, you know what, it's not up to code. You can't make that a bedroom without tearing it down and putting in solid foundation, building this up again. So we did. We got our permits, went in, tore out the garage. Well, this old house, as most old houses, the fence was about 2 inches from the garage. And so we took down the fence, we tear out the garage, we're doing our work, all permits, the city inspectors were all over there. Neighbor next door throws a fit, sues us and says we're encroaching on his space. And we're like, we could be. There was like 2 inches of leeway right there. So he sues us. We have to pay a surveyor. We come out, and surveyors, they are ridiculous with the amount of money they charge.
The question was your favorite property, Allison.
I know. I'm getting there. Wait for it.
I hope you made a lot of money on this.
He sues us over this lot line. Turns out the lot line is 5 feet over on his side. So he lost. So we're like, oh, it looks like we own 5 feet. He threw a fit. He's like throwing things in the street. So we're like, hey, you know what? It looks like here's the lot line. It was pinned in the ground. And we said, you can buy it back from us if you want. So he bought the land back. He sued us, and then he had to buy back his own land, which he thought was his driveway. A few years later, after we had rented this out and he bought the land back from us, we sold the house for over $300,000. So we made money on the cash flow. We made over $200,000 on appreciation, and we made money off of selling the guy's driveway back, which he thought was his to begin with. Yeah. So see, it is my favorite property.
Right,
it was
right.
so many learning experiences in one little bungalow, but it by far was probably one of those that I look back and I learned the most, and I made a lot of money, and I was still in my young 20s at the time, too.
Yeah.
So
You should have
that was
charged
a lot
him
of
rent
fun.
on his driveway.
I should have. Like, hey, retroactive, we've owned this for this many years, and you've been using our driveway.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and they do all have a story. One of my favorites was a house that we bought that we actually lived in, and it was in Utah, but it was built during the Olympics, and it was owned by the U.S. luge team. So it was built to house, a lot of people, and it was in Park City. It was in a good market, and when we looked at it, it had a rental apartment above the garage, and then it still had a 4,500 square foot house besides that. And downstairs was just like room after room after room. Well, we started looking at it, we think, well, we could carve out another income property here. So we put in an entrance on the other side. So we actually had 2 income properties. We lived there for 8 years, paid the mortgage the whole time. We had a 3,800 square foot house, never made a mortgage payment on it, So those type, and we had, historic property too. We did something similar, and that's, to me, I always love the idea of having a property and having somebody else pay the mortgage on it.
I know. That's the best part, right?
Yeah.
That makes every property your most successful property is while somebody else's money is paying for all of that.
I love it.
It's perfect.
Well, this is all great information, and I hope, if nothing else, that our viewers understand this really is fun. I understand the fear when you're starting out, and again, I go back to the risk in real estate is going it alone, not having somebody in your corner to work with you. But I think you guys have demonstrated, we've talked about, it really is a good time. It's a game. I suggest jumping into the game. Yeah. So thank you guys so much for all of the great information. I encourage you, make sure you tune in for each of our roundtable discussions. That's going to do it for us. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Ken. Until next time, thanks for being with us. Thanks for joining us today. Now, I know there's been a lot of great information to process right now, so let me leave you with a few parting words. One of the best things you can do today is to get educated by people who are active, successful investors, who are experienced at helping people just like you achieve their biggest goals. Aligning yourself with the experienced Rich Dad coaching team will enable you to minimize your risks, accelerate your learning, and help guarantee your profits. Robert and the other members of the Rich Dad team produce massive amounts of cash flow from investing because they have the financial education and experience required to develop successful investing plans for the current market. They also have the motivation and dedication necessary to follow through and see those plans to completion. Now, a big secret to their success is the fact that they didn't do it alone. They used an experienced coach who helped them achieve their goals faster and easier than they could have done on their own. You can help guarantee your success as an investor with an experienced Rich Dad coach. Our coaches will work with you one-on-one to create and execute a personalized cash flow plan. They'll help you develop the skills you need, and they'll hold you accountable to your plan to achieve financial freedom. Look, most people never have the chance to work with someone who really knows the ins and outs of investing, someone who will help you avoid costly mistakes and maximize your cash flow. Your experienced Rich Dad coach can help you get the financial education you need. However, the determination to succeed has to be from you. Now is the time you must decide. Is what you currently have all you ever wanted? Or are you ready to be successful and live the life you really deserve? Just click on a banner below to take advantage of this exclusive live stream offer. As you can imagine, Robert's personal coaching staff can only accommodate a limited number of free one-on-one personal strategy sessions. So this offer is only available on a first-come, first-served basis. When we reach that limit, we'll be forced to pull down the offer. Click the banner below right now for your free strategy session. Don't miss this limited time opportunity to dramatically improve your life and the lives of your family. You owe it to yourself and your family to see what's possible. On behalf of everyone here at Rich Dad Coaching, I want to thank you again for joining us today. Take control of your financial future right now. Achieve the success you really deserve.
Hi Kim, hi Robert. First of all, we would like to introduce ourselves. I'm Lou.
And I'm Leontine.
This all started for us when I bought the first book, the Rich Dad Poor Dad, which made me understood really a lot about why things didn't function how they should here in our family economically, and that for me it rang a bell. For Tina it started when I gave her the book Rich Woman.
Yeah, that was for me if the light went on, because that was the moment that I said I can do something. Then we got the coaching session, the introduction to talk with the two of us, and we signed up that same evening. That's how it all started.
Yeah.
And we are so happy about that, because it's only 2 months ago that we started with this coaching program, but already it changed a lot in our lives, because it's not anymore that we have plans, but we make our plans and goals, and our goals for the coming months are small steps on the way to a big step.
Yeah, and what is also very important that now we can discuss about economic things. Talking about our money was always a difficult topic, and now after the beginning of these sessions, it really helps a lot to communicate and to see things positively. You have to do it by yourself.
Yeah.
But you can always rely upon someone who can, who gives you a hand, who can guide you.
It's very much fun to do.
And we're making really good progress. And we realize that it's important to take small steps, but to be focused really every day, every week on the things you have to do, on the education, on the reading, and it's very good. It's really very good. And we also are trying now to transmit it to our children. This is also the right occasion to thank you both really for having started all this, for your potential, for your energy to educate people on this stuff.
And in a simple way.
And in a simple way, in a way that is really reachable for everyone.
Hey, my name is Dennis Garcia, and just a quick shout out to Robert and Kim, who put this program together and have really been dedicated to increasing the overall world's financial education and financial IQ. Because quite honestly, if it wasn't for people like that with those types of intentions, I wouldn't be who I am today. And for that, I'm super thankful, super blessed. And I guess how they really helped me, to put it to words, is they helped me bring consistency. They helped me think of things that I wouldn't have normally thought about myself. The course is very well put together, and it really comes down to what you don't know. You know, you can have a plan and you can think it's the best thing ever, but if you don't have someone there who's already been through that process, then it's really difficult to foresee future problems at an earlier stage. And I decided to go with Rich Dad Poor Dad coaching just because, as I mentioned before, it's really what I didn't know that would ultimately be detrimental down the road. Because just like you have good habits and those compound over time, so do the bad ones. And then those are the ones that you don't normally think about, and those sneak up on you. And you know, and so like just being conscious of like perhaps there's something I'm missing out on. I'm new to the game. I need some guidance. That's really why I invested in the coaching program. And it really changed the way I thought, because it helped me see opportunity and not scarcity. You know, it's easy to cut costs. It's easy to say, oh man, I don't have enough money, I can't do that. But the second I knew what this was going to be worth down the road, I said, how can I make this happen? And that was immediately a switch in my mind, just saying, hey, like, you should always be thinking about how can you take advantage of good opportunities, because I knew this was a good opportunity for me. And I think anybody could really benefit from Rich Dad Poor Dad. I definitely wish I started sooner, because this was definitely a good foundation to help me or put me in the business mindset. And so I'm super thankful for that. I mean, you know, I was already on the way, but this definitely accelerated that process and got me laser focused. And I guess the biggest takeaway is accountability, just having a coach and really just, you know, you're telling yourself like, oh, you know, I'm going to have that call next Friday. I got to have something to show. But also, not only would you be letting them down, you'd be letting yourself down. And so like holding yourself accountable and just having that accountability partner really does help, and helps you like make progress week after week. I would definitely recommend this course to anybody who's interested or even hesitant, because, you know, it's easy to just say, oh, I'm not going to invest in that, or that's too much and this and that. But something I've definitely learned is people will only invest in you what you're willing to invest in yourself. And that's really what it comes down to. I mean, everyone knows right off the bat, or if they don't know right, you know, immediately, they're going to know down the road whether you're a phony or not, and whether you know your stuff or you don't. And so like that's huge. And I'm always willing to invest in more education. I'm a student the rest of my life, and I really appreciate this accelerated learning program. It's been huge help. So yeah, big thanks to Robert and Kim, big thanks to my mentor Barbara, and yeah, I highly recommend this program to everybody.